One of the most important aspects to movie making can be defined in one simple word: adaptation. Because simply put, a movie can have great actors, great performances, great special effects, great cinematography, and even a great script. But if it fails to properly adapt whatever story it's trying to bring to the big screen, then more often than not, it won't work. When any story, be it a book, a TV show, a video game, or even another movie has a huge fan base, one of the most important things for writers to understand is why the property is beloved and make sure to keep the essence of what the story is all about intact. That's what the Mario movie did, just for one example of that, and the results speak for themselves, as I got into in another video which you can find a link in the description to. But today, I'd like to do something different and go over a few movie adaptations that weren't afraid to deviate heavily from their source material, specifically The Untouchables and The Fugitive, and go over why both of them work so well. And there will be minor spoilers for both movies ahead, as well as their respective TV shows. So in case you don't want anything ruined, you might just want to be careful. You have been warned. Okay, so just for those of you who don't know, yes, both the 1987 movie The Untouchables and 1993's The Fugitive were both based off TV shows that were extremely popular in the late 1950s and 60s. In fact, The Fugitive even made history in 1967 for being the first TV show to actually have a series finale where all the loose ends were tied up, as I got into in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too. But the point here is, while both of these shows were some of the most famous of their day, they were both largely forgotten by the public at large by the time their respective movies came out in the late 80s and early 90s, despite still being widely praised by those who've actually seen them as great TV shows. And in that lies the biggest reason why both of these movies work so well. Because as widely well known, trying to make a movie out of a TV show fails way more than it succeeds. Because among other things, TV shows can theoretically be as long as they want to, while a movie is much more limited as far as time goes, often making it difficult to squeeze all the material from a given show into a manageable length. I even dedicated an entire video to detailing pretty much the only two ways a TV show can be made into a movie and actually work, which you can also find a link in the description too if you're curious. And not to mention, sometimes what works on TV just doesn't on the big screen, as something like Thomas and the Magic Railroad perfectly demonstrates. Low budget effects may be charming on a kid's show, but in a movie they just come across as creepy, at least to those who aren't already longtime fans, which is also a problem in and of itself. And not to mention, and as I just noted, they tried to cram too much from several TV shows into one movie and added such things as magic to the mix, which fans obviously weren't too happy about. But these were problems that both The Untouchables and The Fugitive were fortunate enough not to face. Because first off, the ideas behind both these shows were ones that could work for both movies and TV. The idea of having to take down Al Capone or an innocent man trying to clear his name while the police chased after him can both suit the vastly different formats perfectly depending on how they're used. And in both cases, the writers knew how to tell the story to their specific needs and limitations. Because while both of them could be stretched out over various seasons, they could also be presented and tied up within 2 hours. So that was already one thing in their favor. And, of course, what also helped was that the concept behind both these shows were ones that have been tried and true on the big screen before. Because, let's face it, the general idea of a police department trying to take down a brutal gang, or an innocent man on the run having to clear his name, have been used as the basic plot for dozens of movies over the decades. But the other, more important reason that both these movies work is that they aren't trying to be literal adaptations of the TV shows they took inspiration from. If anything, they serve as a much more modern take on what the TV shows had presented rather than anything directly connected to them. Because the Eliot Ness from the 1959 show and the 1987 movie, for example, are not the same person. And the same goes even more so for both versions of Richard Kimball, because among other things, on the show his marriage was already on the rocks before his wife was killed instead of being happily married. So to say that both these movies are adaptations of the aforementioned shows would honestly be stretching it, and would be way more accurate to say that they simply took loose inspiration from them in order to tell their own story with a similar idea. Now, by this point you might be tempted to point out that there are plenty of movie adaptations of TV shows that followed a similar format to this and still ended in disaster. So what made these two movies so different? And the answer to that mainly lies in two things. First, how well written the movie is overall, because that's frankly the most important part of any film. But the other reason is that a writer must know not only what kind of adaptation is the best for a property at any given time, but what potential fans will expect out of it. Like, to go back to that example from before, when Thomas and the Magic Railroad came out, the show was not only still on, but at the height of its popularity. So it was basically a given that people were going to be upset that it wasn't more faithful to the show. Sure, the poor writing also had something to do with it, but that was the main reason. With these two movies, however, their respective shows had already fallen out of the public consciousness long ago, which gave them free rein to play more fast and loose with how much they took from the show, because there weren't millions of fans eagerly waiting to see what an adaptation of their favorite show was going to look like. And on top of that, both movies smartly pay just enough homage and respect to their inspiration that any fans of those old TV shows will be satisfied with them. To put it simply, an important part of adapting anything is knowing the time and place to give a more modern, less faithful adaptation of the source material, and both The Untouchables and The Fugitive waited long enough so that whatever fans were left of those shows would accept something different and not expect a shot-for-shot remake or continuation of the show. Though what also helped is that both these movies made it clear from the get-go that they were going to be very different from what came before, which further helped any fans of both shows understand that this was going to be a different take on them. So in the end, the main reason both these movies were able to get away with being so different from their source material mainly comes down to the fact that they were released far enough away from the original TV shows for audiences to be ready for something different, as well as being very well written on top of that. Especially because people are generally open to different or modernized takes on beloved properties just so long as it's handled well and is respectful to the original, and both movies managed to pull that off perfectly. Though once again, the time discrepancy between the shows and movies was definitely also a contributing factor to that. And not to mention, The Untouchables and The Fugitive both knew exactly what they were and never tried to act like they were better than the source material. And that, combined with everything else I just went over, perfectly demonstrate why they're considered two of the best loose adaptations of a classic TV show out there. Alright, I think I've made my point quite clear. So now I'd like you to tell me what you think. Do you believe that most movie adaptations of TV shows should follow a similar format to the ones that The Untouchables and The Fugitive used? Or do you believe that there are actually various ways to get that kind of adaptation right? Please let me know in the comments below. But please keep in mind that movies can be a very subjective thing, and how a TV show should be adapted into a film is no exception. So if you think I was completely wrong about everything I just went over, that's totally fine. And thank you all for watching. It is all very appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.